You ever wake up, grab your coffee, and find out someone built 28 houses on your land? Yeah, 28. Not one, not two. A full neighborhood. That's exactly how my week started. For me, it began like any other morning. The sun was barely up, the air smelled of wet grass, and I was flipping through property tax receipts on my kitchen table. Every year I double-checked them, mostly out of habit. My dad drilled that into me. Paperwork keeps your land yours, son. He bought that stretch of dirt on the edge of Brookvale back when it was just empty fields and cow fences. 3 acres, flat as a board. We were going to turn it into a workshop for restoring old trucks someday. But life got busy and the land just sat there, quietly waiting. For 15 years I've paid every bill, every cent of tax, kept the boundaries marked and the title clean. That land is my family's signature, nobody else's. So imagine my face when my buddy Travis, a concrete supplier, called me one Friday morning. "Hey Mitch, you seeing what's going on over at your corner lot?" "What corner lot?" I asked. "Pine Ridge and Old Mill. Looks like condos going up fast." "Real fancy ones," I laughed. "That's impossible. Nobody can build there. It's my land." He paused. "Well, maybe you should take a look." So I did. It was a 20-minute drive that felt like an hour. The closer I got, the louder the noise. The thump of hammers, the echo of nail guns, the constant grind of cement mixers. Then I turned the corner and my stomach dropped. Right where my property line starts. There it was. An entire construction site. Rows of condos. Framed walls already standing tall. Trucks hauling lumber. Crews shouting orders. Someone had even put up a massive banner that read, "Brookvale HOA, Phase 2. Luxury Homes." I parked at the edge of the site, climbed out, and just stood there in disbelief. For a minute, I honestly thought maybe I'd lost my mind. That somehow I'd taken a wrong turn and ended up at a different site. But then I saw the old oak tree. The same one my dad planted when I was a kid. It stood crooked near the fence line, exactly where our property began. There was no mistake. These people were building on my land. I waved at a worker carrying drywall and asked, "Hey, who's in charge here?" He pointed toward a man in a white hard hat, barking orders. "That's Mr. Kraus, site manager. HOA project." I walked up to Kraus. He turned, looked me up and down, and gave a quick smile. The kind of smile people use when they think you're wasting their time. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "You can tell me why you're building 28 houses on my property." He frowned slightly, glancing at his clipboard. "Your property? No, this is Brookvale HOA's expansion lot. Maybe you're mistaken." "Pretty sure I'm not," I said, handing him a copy of my deed from the glove compartment. He barely looked at it. "I think there's been a mix-up with the old survey lines, that's all. We've got all the necessary permits." Then he turned and shouted something to a crew member like our conversation didn't matter. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "You're telling me you built half a neighborhood without checking ownership?" He shrugged. "These things happen. The HOA handles the paperwork. You can call them." And just like that, he walked away. I stood there surrounded by the rumble of machinery and the smell of fresh cement, staring at a place that was legally mine, but now looked like a stranger's city. Each hammer strike sounded like an insult. Each truckload of gravel felt like someone erasing my family's name off the land. I pulled out my phone and searched the Brookvale HOA office number. When a woman answered, her voice was cheerful in that overly practiced way. "This is Gwen, president of the Brookvale Homeowners Association. How can I help you today?" "Yeah, Gwen," I said. "This is Mitch Mitchell. I own the lot at Pine Ridge and Old Mill. Looks like your contractors built on my land." A pause. Then, "Oh dear, that's odd. Our records show that property is part of Phase 2. "Well, your records are wrong," I said. "I have the county deed right in my hand." She said, her tone still smooth. "Why don't you come by our office this afternoon? We'll take a look together." When I hung up, I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. They had built an entire community without realizing they were on private property. My property. I sat in the truck for a long minute, staring at the roofs glittering under the sun. Workers laughed, engines roared, dust clouds rolled across the road, and all of it sat on the land my father left me. Driving away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a mistake. It was arrogance. Someone thought they could steamroll a regular guy because they had money, lawyers, and confidence. They didn't expect the landowner to show up. I promised myself one thing as I turned back onto the highway. This wasn't over. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to make them see what they'd done. Maybe they thought they could hide behind paperwork and permits. Maybe they thought I'd take a check and go away. But they were wrong. Very wrong. Because the moment I saw those houses standing where my grass used to grow, I realized something. They hadn't just built on my property. They'd built on my patience, and the foundation of their mistake was about to crack wide open. The dust from the site still clung to my windshield as I drove home. The sign in my rearview mirror, Phase 2 luxury homes coming soon, flickered in the sunlight like a warning. They thought they were expanding their community. What they didn't know was that they'd just declared war, and instead of apologizing, they were about to try and blame me. When I walked into the Brookvale HOA office, the air felt heavier than it should have. Maybe it was the smell of polished wood and coffee. Or maybe it was the smug silence that hangs in places where people think they're untouchable. The receptionist smiled like she'd practiced it in a mirror. "Mr. Mitchell, they're expecting you, expecting me." That line told me everything I needed to know. They already knew who I was. She led me into a glass-walled conference room where 3 people were waiting. At the head of the table sat Kraus, the same site manager I'd met at the construction zone. This time he wasn't wearing a hard hat or dusty boots. He was dressed in a tailored suit, leaning back like the king of a castle. On his left sat Gwen, the HOA president, a middle-aged woman with perfect posture, manicured nails, and the calm confidence of someone used to getting her way. To her right was a younger woman, maybe late 20s, wearing glasses and clutching a file. Rachel, their legal counsel. "Mr. Mitchell," Gwen said, standing just long enough to make it seem polite. "Please have a seat. We've been looking over your concerns." I sat down slowly, placing my folder of property documents on the table. "Concerns? You built 28 condos on my land. I'd call that more than a concern." Kraus smiled, resting his chin on his hand. "Now hold on. We've got all the necessary permits. Maybe there's been some confusion about the boundary lines." I looked at him, trying not to laugh. "Confusion? I've owned that land for 15 years. My father bought it. It's been in my name since the day he passed. There's no confusion." He exchanged a glance with Gwen. A silent conversation I wasn't supposed to see. She smiled softly, the kind of smile that hides a dagger behind it. "Mr. Mitchell, I assure you, we take these things seriously. We'll review your claim and verify the county's records. It could take a few weeks." "Few weeks?" I repeated. "You're actively building on my land right now. Every day your crews are out there. You're digging deeper into a lawsuit." Gwen's expression didn't change. She reached across the table, slid my folder toward her, and flipped through the papers lazily, as if she was skimming a grocery list. "We'll have our legal team examine this. Rachel will handle the verification process." Rachel looked up briefly. Her eyes met mine for a split second, uneasy, almost apologetic. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Instead, she nodded. "Yes, we'll, check with the county." I leaned forward. "You don't need to check with the county. I've already done that. This," I tapped the paper, "is the official deed, recorded, certified, stamped." Kraus chuckled under his breath, like this was all some misunderstanding that I'd eventually drop. "You'd be surprised how often survey errors happen, Mr. Mitchell. I've been in development for 20 years. Lines shift. Paperwork gets old. Sometimes it's just easier to negotiate a buyout." There it was, the real motive. They didn't want to fix anything. They wanted to buy their way out of it. "So that's what this is," I said quietly. "You build first, apologize later, and hope the little guy takes the check." Gwen folded her hands neatly. "Let's not jump to conclusions. If an error occurred, we'll find a fair solution." "Fair?" I asked. "Fair would have been asking permission before breaking ground. Fair would have been respecting private property." Rachel shifted in her chair again, clearly uncomfortable. Her pen rolled across the table and clattered onto the floor. She bent to pick it up, and for a moment I caught a whisper under her breath. So soft it was almost nothing. "You're right." I looked at her, but she didn't meet my eyes again. When the meeting ended, Gwen stood, offering her hand like this was all perfectly civil. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Mitchell. Please don't make any sudden moves. Let's handle this the professional way." I shook her hand, even though every instinct told me not to. Her grip was firm, cold, the kind of grip that says we're done talking. As I walked out of the office, the receptionist smiled again. The same polite, empty smile. I didn't return it. Outside, the sun was blazing, but the air felt sharp. My heart was pounding. I could feel it. They weren't planning to fix anything. They were going to bury me in paperwork, drag things out, hope I'd run out of patience or money. Over the next few days, that's exactly what they tried to do. I got calls from different representatives, each one pretending to be helpful, but really just stalling. "We're still reviewing documents. We've reached out to the surveyor. Our legal team is awaiting confirmation." It was the same script over and over. Meanwhile, the construction continued. Every morning I'd drive by, and there they were. Trucks, workers, cement mixers, roofing crews. They didn't even slow down. Each day, another condo went up. It was like they were daring me to stop them. One afternoon, I parked my truck on the roadside and took photos. Evidence of everything. As I snapped pictures of the new walls rising where my grass used to be, Kraus spotted me from across the site. He waved, that same arrogant grin on his face. "Still at it, Mitchell?" he shouted. "You'll thank us when the property value goes up." I didn't even respond. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, the same place where I'd first seen those tax receipts. I laid out every document, every photograph, every email. My land, my name, my proof. They could hide behind their lawyers and their charm, but the facts were on my side. Still, something about Rachel's look in that meeting stuck with me. That flicker of guilt in her eyes. It told me there was more to this. Maybe they already knew the truth. Maybe someone in that office had realized they built on the wrong parcel weeks ago and chose to keep it quiet. I decided right then, enough waiting, enough fake smiles and legal delays. I picked up the phone and called the HOA office one last time. Gwen's voice came through, calm as ever. "Gwen," I said, "you have 1 week to fix this mistake. 1 week, or I start tearing those condos down myself." There was a pause, then a faint laugh. "Now, Mr. Mitchell, let's not do anything drastic." "Drastic?" I said. "You haven't seen drastic yet." Then I hung up. That was the night I made the promise. 1 week. 7 days to do the right thing. After that, whatever happened next would be on them. 7 days. That's all I gave them. 1 week to fix their mistake before I fixed it myself. It sounded dramatic when I said it, but by then I was past caring how it sounded. You don't just let people take what's yours, especially not when they smile to your face while doing it. On day 1, I made a plan. I wasn't going to sit back while they pretended to review documents. I called an old friend from my father's construction days, Rick, a demolition foreman who'd handled tougher projects than this. When I told him what happened, there was a long silence on the phone. Then he said, "You serious, Mitch? They really built on your land?" 28 condos, I said flatly. "All of them." He let out a low whistle. "That's not a mistake. That's theft in daylight." "Yeah," I said, "and I'm taking it back." By the next morning, Rick had driven down with 3 of his guys. They brought maps, gear, and that steady kind of confidence you only get from years of tearing things down. We spread everything across my dining table. Blueprints, survey maps, county lines. "They built right over the boundary," Rick said, tracing the line with his finger. "If this is accurate, half their development sits squarely on your lot." "It's accurate," I said, "but I need proof that'll hold in court if this goes south." That's when I called in someone else. Darren Cole, a county inspector who'd known my father. Darren was by the book, but he hated corruption even more than paperwork. When he saw the documents, his eyebrows rose. "They didn't even file for zoning adjustment?" he asked. "Nope," he shook his head. "This is going to blow up in their faces. But if you're smart, you'll let me confirm everything officially before you do anything." "I'm smart," I said, "but I'm also done waiting." By the 3rd day, my daughter Elena got involved. She'd just graduated from law school, full of that restless energy young lawyers have when they still believe the system can work. When I told her what happened, she was furious. "They can't just do that, Dad," she said. "That's fraud." "I know," I said, "but they're hiding behind lawyers. Then we'll beat them at their own game." She pulled her laptop closer, eyes narrowing. "Show me everything." For hours, she combed through files, building permits, contractor lists, HOA filings. Every document the HOA had submitted to the county office was supposed to be public record, but half of them weren't even in the system. "That's weird," she muttered. "There's no inspection approval for Phase 2, no safety sign-offs, and look at this. The environmental permit still says pending." She looked up, her expression turning serious. "Dad, they built half those condos without final approval." I leaned back in my chair. "You're telling me the same people who accused me of being mistaken are building illegally?" "Worse," she said. "They're pretending everything's approved. These are falsified filings." That was the moment everything changed. I realized the HOA wasn't just arrogant. They were crooked. By day 4, word started spreading quietly among the construction workers. Some of them had heard rumors that the project wasn't on legal ground. A few even came to me privately. "We're just doing our jobs, Mr. Mitchell," one of them said. "We didn't know." I didn't blame them. This wasn't their fault. They were pawns in someone else's game. But the more people found out, the more nervous the HOA got. I could feel it. Their silence was starting to crack. On day 5, a letter showed up at my door. It was from Gwen's office, full of legal jargon and fake diplomacy. "We are in the process of reviewing your allegations," it read. and would advise you not to engage in any independent action that could be deemed destructive or unlawful. I laughed when I read that part. Unlawful? They built 28 homes on stolen land, and I was the one being warned about legality. That night, I sat outside on the porch, watching the sunset. The air was still, heavy. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the kind of anger that builds up when you've been ignored for too long. I looked over at Elena, who was still buried in her laptop. "You should get some sleep," I said. She didn't even look up. "Not yet. There's something off with these permits." I smiled faintly. "You sound like your grandfather." "He'd never let anyone take our land," she said, "and neither will we." Day 6 came like a storm. I woke up early to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was Elena. "Dad, you need to see this," she said, her voice shaking slightly. I drove to her office. She had papers spread across the desk, copies of building permits, all from the HOA's files. "Look," she said, pointing. "These aren't signed by any county official. The approval numbers are duplicated. Some even belong to other projects miles away." "So what does that mean?" I asked. "It means," she said slowly, "they didn't file half their permits. They built everything illegally." For a few seconds, I just stared at the papers. My whole chest felt tight, but not from shock, from clarity. Every doubt I'd had vanished. They weren't mistaken. They weren't confused. They thought they could get away with it. I called Rick. "Be ready," I told him. "Tomorrow morning." He didn't ask questions. "You got it." That evening, I stood by the window of my office, looking out at the land that had been ours for decades. My father's name was still carved on the old fence post at the edge of the property. I thought about all the mornings we'd spent out there, mowing, planting, planning. He always said, "Land remembers who it belongs to." I guess it was time to remind everyone else, too. When the sun rose on day 7, the air was thick with dust and determination. I could hear engines in the distance before I even stepped outside. Rick's trucks were already rolling down the dirt road. Bulldozers, excavators, flatbeds. The sound of them made something settle inside me. Elena stood by my side, holding a clipboard. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" she asked. I nodded. "Completely. Once you start, there's no going back." "There's nothing left to go back to," I said. The convoy pulled up to the edge of the condos. Workers stopped what they were doing, staring. Some stepped back, unsure of what was happening. Kraus came running from across the site, shouting something I couldn't hear over the roar of engines. Gwen wasn't far behind, her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling every lawyer she knew. I didn't care. I climbed up onto the first bulldozer, looked out over the rows of stolen homes, and took a deep breath. The countdown was over. The week was up, and for the first time in months, I finally felt like I was standing on my land again. That morning, Brookvale didn't wake up to birds or traffic. It woke up to engines, the kind that shake the ground before you even see them. Excavators rolled down the street, their arms glinting in the sunrise. Dump trucks lined up along the curb, dust swirling in their wake. People came out of their homes still in pajamas, coffee mugs in hand, squinting at the noise. And at the center of it all, I stood in my work boots, a rolled-up document in one hand. The demolition order. Signed, sealed, and legal. It was barely 7 a.m., and the site looked like a movie set about to explode. My crew, Rick's men, were already in position. The engines idled, their growl echoing off the empty condo walls. Across the street, HOA members started gathering, their polished cars parked crookedly along the road. Some filmed with their phones. Some shouted for me to stop. None of them realized that this time I was completely within the law. Kraus came sprinting out first, his fancy shoes sinking into the dirt.
"Mitch!"
he yelled, his voice cracking.
"You can't do this!"
I didn't say anything. I just held up the paper. Behind me, Darren, the county inspector, stepped forward. His orange vest and clipboard made him look official, but the calm in his eyes said everything. Kraus turned to him desperately. "You're going to stop this, right? Tell him this is illegal." Darren adjusted his glasses, flipped through a few sheets, and said, "Actually, he can." The crowd went silent. Even the engines seemed to pause for a second. Darren kept reading, his voice clear and steady. "This construction violates multiple property and zoning codes. No recorded approval for Phase 2, no safety inspection for utilities, and," he glanced up at Kraus, "the entire development sits on land not legally owned by the HOA or any of its subsidiaries." Kraus's face turned the color of wet cement. "That's ridiculous."
"We have all the permits!"
"No, you had fake ones," Darren replied, folding the papers neatly. "And the county's already confirmed that every permit your office submitted for this section was falsified. This order gives Mr. Mitchell the right to clear his property immediately." I looked over and saw Gwen walking up, her usual poise gone. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the truth had finally settled on her shoulders. Behind her, Rachel, the lawyer, followed, clutching a folder to her chest. She looked pale, almost sick. "Gwen," I said evenly, "you could have stopped this a week ago." She didn't meet my eyes. "You don't have to do this, Mitch," she said quietly. "We can talk. We can negotiate. You had your chance to talk," I said. "Now it's time to listen." Rachel finally spoke, her voice trembling. "He's right," she said, barely above a whisper. "We built on the wrong parcel. The survey was misfiled. Everything beyond Lot 37 is his land." Kraus spun around. "You're siding with him now?" "I'm siding with the truth," Rachel said, her voice cracking. "We made a mistake, and you knew it." He glared at her, then turned back to me. "You're insane, Mitchell. You'll ruin everything." I raised my hand, a small motion, but it felt like the world held its breath. Rick nodded from the cab of his excavator, waiting for the go-ahead. I looked once more at the condos. Shiny siding, new paint, the illusion of something solid. And yet it was all built on lies. Then I gave the signal. Engines roared to life. Steel arms swung forward. The first crash of metal against concrete sent a shockwave through the air. Windows shattered. Dust burst upward like a storm. People screamed, some filming, others backing away. Kraus was shouting something I couldn't hear over the chaos. Gwen stood frozen, one hand over her mouth. Rachel just closed her eyes. One by one, the condos that had stood proudly for weeks came crashing down. The sound was deafening, a mix of engines, grinding metal, and splintering wood. Each fall felt like a punctuation mark in a long, bitter sentence that was finally ending. Rick guided the machines with precision, tearing down what had never belonged there. In less than 10 minutes, the first row was gone, reduced to piles of rubble. Dust clouds rolled through the street, covering everything in a thin gray film. The morning sun cut through the haze, golden beams slicing across the wreckage. It looked like the world itself was reclaiming what was stolen. Through the dust, I saw Darren watching silently, arms crossed. He wasn't smiling, but there was something like respect in his eyes. He knew this wasn't just demolition, it was justice. Kraus stumbled toward me, coughing, covered in dust. "You're done," he shouted hoarsely. "We'll sue you for every dollar you have." I stared at him, unflinching. "You built on my land without permission. The law's on my side now. Good luck suing the man who owns the ground under your feet." He didn't have a response. He just stood there, watching everything he'd built, everything he'd stolen, collapse into debris. Behind him, Gwen finally spoke. Her voice was calm, broken. "We should have listened," she said. Rachel nodded slowly. "He warned us." By the time the last structure came down, the sun was high. The noise faded, leaving only the hum of engines winding down and the soft rustle of settling dust. The air smelled like cement, metal, and freedom. Rick climbed out of his machine, wiping his face. "That's it," he said simply. "All clear." Elena appeared beside me, camera in hand. She'd been documenting everything, step by step, just like we planned. "It's over," she said, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. I looked over the wreckage, twisted beams, shattered glass, the ghosts of buildings that should never have existed. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like balance, like something had finally been set right. Gwen and Rachel stood together, watching in silence. Kraus had already stormed off, probably calling his lawyers or hiding from them. Darren handed me the final inspection sheet. "You're clean," he said. "No violations. The county's closing this site permanently." I nodded. "Appreciate it." He gave me a firm handshake. Not many people would have fought this far. Most just give up. I looked at the land, the open, ruined stretch that was finally mine again. "Some things," I said quietly, "are worth fighting for." As my crew packed up, neighbors began clapping from across the street, hesitant at first, then louder. They'd watched the whole thing unfold for weeks, but now they understood. I wasn't some angry man causing chaos. I was the owner reclaiming what was stolen. When the last truck drove off, I stood alone in the dust, holding the demolition order one last time before folding it up and putting it in my pocket. This wasn't revenge. It was justice served, plain and simple. And yet, as the dust began to settle, I couldn't help but think, this story wasn't quite over, because what came next was even better. The courtroom was packed that morning. You could feel the tension the moment you walked in. Reporters whispering, HOA members pretending to be confident, the faint echo of heels on marble floors. The air smelled faintly of paper, wood polish, and nerves. After everything that had happened, the arguments, the threats, the demolition, this was supposed to be the final chapter. The HOA had sued me for unlawful destruction of property. demanding millions in damages. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so insulting. They built illegally on my land, tried to bury me in legal threats, and now they were playing the victims. I sat at the defense table beside my daughter Elena, who had been with me through it all. She looked calm, collected, more confident than I'd ever seen her. Across from us sat Gwen, looking exhausted, and Kraus, trying hard to look composed but failing miserably. Rachel, their lawyer, was there too, though she avoided eye contact with everyone. I could tell she didn't want to be part of this mess anymore. When Judge Brandt entered, the room went silent. He was an older man with a reputation for cutting through nonsense. Exactly the kind of judge you want when the truth is on your side. He adjusted his glasses, glanced over the files, and spoke in that calm, steady tone that demanded attention. "Let's make this quick," he said. "I've read both sides' statements." Their attorney, a slick man in a dark blue suit, stood first. "Your Honor, my clients, the Brookvale Homeowners Association, suffered significant financial loss due to Mr. Mitchell's reckless and unlawful demolition of private property." The judge raised a hand. "Private property?" he said, tilting his head. "Is that what we're calling it?" The lawyer hesitated. "Well, yes, Your Honor. These structures were built on land that did not legally belong to your clients," the judge interrupted. His voice didn't rise, but it cut sharper than any shout could have. "Am I mistaken?" The lawyer shuffled his papers. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding regarding boundary." Judge Brandt leaned forward. "A misunderstanding? You mean the falsified permits? The unapproved zoning extensions? The lack of any legal ownership over the parcel?" Gwen shifted uncomfortably. Kraus's face turned red. You could hear every shuffle, every cough in the courtroom. Elena glanced at me, her eyes bright. She knew exactly where this was going. The judge looked at me next. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, "you're the registered owner of the property in question?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "Been paying taxes on it for 15 years. "And you filed for demolition after the county inspector verified the violations?" "That's correct." The judge nodded once, tapping his pen lightly against the table. "Seems straightforward to me." He turned back to the HOA's side. "Your clients built on private property without legal permission, ignored multiple warnings, and submitted falsified documents to the county. Then they sued the property owner for damages when he enforced his rights. Is that accurate?" The lawyer's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge closed the file in front of him. The sound of the paper snapping shut echoed through the courtroom like a gavel. "Then this isn't a boundary dispute," he said coldly. "This is negligence." Gwen's face fell completely. Rachel lowered her eyes, her hand trembling slightly. Kraus opened his mouth to argue, but the judge didn't give him a chance. "Verdict," Judge Brandt said, turning toward the clerk. "Full ownership of the property restored to Mr. Mitchell. All legal fees and demolition costs to be covered by the HOA. Additionally, any remaining structures or debris on the property are to be cleared at their expense under county supervision." He paused for a moment, looking at Gwen. "You should be grateful Mr. Mitchell isn't pressing criminal charges for fraud." There was a ripple of whispers through the courtroom. Reporters scribbling notes, a few gasps, the sound of quiet justice finally landing where it belonged. Elena reached over and squeezed my hand, tears forming in her eyes. It wasn't just a victory, it was vindication. For months we'd been dismissed, ignored, and threatened. But in that one sentence, everything flipped. The power they thought they had, gone. The arrogance, the legal tricks, the fake politeness, all of it crumbled, just like their condos. When the gavel finally hit the desk, the sound was final, clean, beautiful. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining brighter than it had in weeks. News crews were waiting, microphones ready, but I didn't stop to talk. I didn't need to. The truth spoke for itself. Gwen walked out behind us, head down, avoiding cameras. Rachel caught my eye briefly, then gave a small nod, an unspoken apology that didn't need words. Kraus didn't say a thing. He just got into his car and drove off, leaving behind the wreckage of everything he'd built on lies. That afternoon, I went back to the land. It looked different now, quiet, peaceful. The rubble had been cleared, the air clean again. The fence still stood where it always had, marking the line between what was mine and what never should have been taken. Elena walked beside me, her shoes crunching on the gravel. "So, what now?" she asked softly. I looked over the open space, imagining it not as a battlefield anymore, but as something full of potential. "Now," I said, "we build something real." She smiled. "Another house?" I shook my head. "No, a workshop, a place for the community, for kids who want to learn real skills, carpentry, design, maybe even small business training. Your granddad would have loved that." Her smile widened. "That's Actually perfect. I nodded, looking out at the land one last time as the sun began to dip behind the trees. This place has seen enough lies, I said quietly. Time to fill it with something honest. We stood there for a while, just listening to the wind move through the empty space. The same land that had once been stolen from us now stood free again, raw, open, waiting for something good. Sometimes people think justice means revenge, but standing there, I realized it wasn't about tearing others down. It was about standing your ground until the truth does the tearing for you. The HOA would move on, their reputation in ruins. The town would talk about what happened for years. The condos that never should have been, the man who tore them down, and the judge who made it right. And me? I wasn't interested in fame or payback. I just wanted peace. The kind that comes when you finally look at your land and see it the way it's supposed to be. Now, that land is mine again. Legally, proudly, completely. But instead of condos, I'm turning it into something better. A community workshop for kids who need a place to start. Because if there's one thing this whole nightmare taught me, it's that no amount of money, power, or arrogance can outweigh the truth written in ink and backed by integrity. So when you see the pictures of those 28 condos reduced to dust, don't think of it as destruction. Think of it as renewal. Because sometimes the only way to rebuild something honest is to tear down the lies first.